to the rugby. The Lions' first warm-up game against Japan at Murrayfield tomorrow. It's live and off the ball from 3 o'clock there, and full commentary indeed of the entire series. Delighted to say that South African rugby writer Craig Gray joins us on the line. Good morning to you, Craig.
Morning, guys. How are you doing there?
Good. Plenty to talk about, and the rugby as well. But we might start with the news that RG Sneeman and Damien Delande have been cleared to return home. They're going to continue their burns recovery after that fire pit accident. Any expectation that they're going to play against the Lions at some point?
Yeah, absolutely. Well, I certainly think Linda's in the mix. I think Sneeman's issue is his knee more than the burns. And they're going to have to, monitor whether he's fit enough to play. Of course, they want him to be in the mix. He's one of the survivors from Rugby World Cup 2019, and a big part of the bomb squad coming off the bench. And with Loert de Jager's, fitness also a little bit under the microscope. South Africa is a little bit short in the second row if Sneeman's ruled out and de Jager's ruled out as well. So both will certainly feature if they're fit. And at this stage, it looks like Lenda's got more chance of playing than Sneeman.
All right, well, we'll see what happens as they return home and get back involved. South Africa bracing itself, Craig, for that third wave of COVID. Especially badly hit is the area where the squad are landing into and are going to play the vast majority of the games. All the players are going to be vaccinated. But any sense that with the backdrop of deaths and hospitalisations and people who are watching us this morning be able to see on screen exactly how the Gauteng area, the daily cases have shot up over the last little while. But yeah, in terms of that context and that backdrop, is there any sense, Craig, that it gets curtailed or cancelled?
Not yet. I mean, I've spoken to rugby officials. They simply just can't afford to cancel it. But the optics are starting to look bad. You're now getting to a situation where there's some hospitals in Gauteng where patients are dying in hallways. I mean, that's how serious it is. It's this is not a joke. And as you can see from that graph, the spike is higher than it ever was in the second or the first wave, especially in Gauteng. And we're not even near the peak yet. And some medical experts I've been speaking to, are concerned. We haven't even started considering whether the Delta variant is part of this equation. And the medical people are also scratching their heads as to why the spike is so violent in the third wave. With the same variant, the beta variant in South Africa. It just seems odd. They're trying to get to the bottom of what's caused such a rapid rise. So from a rugby playing point of view, and the squads, they will be locked down in hotels in Sandton and in Fourways, which are northern suburbs of Johannesburg. They will be in biosecure environments. They will be tested. They will take every precaution, and there's quite a bit of data around doing these biosecure environments from around the world now. We've had about a year, 9 months to a year of various organizations doing this. And there's very little argument that the rugby itself can go ahead and the players will be relatively safe, given that they're vaccinated, given that they're staying in these biosecure environments. But it then becomes an issue of optics. If you go to the Indian Premier League earlier this year, a couple of players tested positive, but by and large, the sort of 300 to 400 people involved with the IPL from players and staff were unaffected by coronavirus living in their biosecure environments. But people were dying in the streets in India, and eventually the optics just didn't look good. People became angry. The cricket was carrying on like normal when there was so much suffering in the country. And that's a fear that I have, that we could start seeing happen in South Africa. Lions tour is massive. There's a lot of public interest. But at the moment, with the way coronavirus is going, people are far more concerned about loved ones and literally living or dying than whether a rugby tour goes ahead. And I think that's going to be the challenge. It's already going to be a sterile tour with no fans, with vast empty stadiums, with no interaction between the players and people. Normally on Lions tours, there will be breakfasts and dinners and speakers and visits to schools and old age homes. None of that's going to happen. This is just going to be a completely sterile environment. And then there's going to be the rugby. And then it becomes a question of, is it really worth it? And what are the optics? And I don't have the answer to that question. But if the IPL is an example, this could go south pretty quickly.
Yeah, it will be interesting to see over that early period. I was reading some quotes yesterday from a hospital professor, Professor Ventnor, in relation to, you mentioned the optics there. The South African team obviously are going to be vaccinated ahead of many more vulnerable people that are waiting to get vaccinated. And you mentioned about the reasons for the third wave, that potentially some of that is to do with the slow vaccination as well. But his point particularly was that the South African team got vaccinated and then did nothing to publicly advocate for vaccinations.
Yeah, it's a difficult one because they're damned if they do and damned if they don't. They were pushed to the front of the queue, and the way I understand it is they were asked not to shout it from the rooftops, essentially. But when asked in press conferences, they didn't lie. They said, yeah, we were vaccinated. And it was part of this trial called the Sisonke trial that they brought in a whole bunch of J&J vaccinations earmarked for health workers. And the professors that ran the Sisonke trial, Professor Becker, I think her name is, they offered it to not only the Springboks, but to the South African cricket team, which is currently on tour in the West Indies, and to the South African Olympic team, which is heading off to Tokyo shortly. So it was an offer made by the Sisonke trial. So I think from that point of view, the Springboks ethically and morally did nothing wrong. They were given this, and it obviously solves a problem for them in terms of getting the Lions tour done. Whether or not they should be advocating for the vaccine rollout, I guess, is understandable that Professor Venter feels that way. But on the other hand, if they start getting bogged down in political causes, and it has become political, you're entering a whole other realm of distraction, perhaps. So when they've been asked about it, they've been straight up and down. Yes, we got vaccinated, but they're not exactly advocating for it. And again, that's a personal choice, perhaps, from individuals. And I would imagine someone like Siya Kolisi, having strong views on many social justice issues, could, if he feels strongly about vaccinations, I don't know whether he does, would be quite happy to talk about it and advocate for it. If I'm using him as an example, I'm not saying that's his stance. So I don't think he would be stopped, put it that way. But I don't think the Springboks, as an organisation, are going to take a line and say, all right, we're going to start a campaign to advocate for vaccinations. It's probably not their role, and probably worth staying out of.
Is there a sense that Kolisi, other players with a real conscience, are uneasy about the tests, the tour happening in general, Craig? Like if you leave vaccinations aside for one moment.
No, I haven't got that sense, personally, but they have been locked away as well for, you only see them on a Zoom meeting, and so you don't really get to chat to someone in the foyer. On a regular tour, as sports, you guys would know, you bump into players waiting for a coffee, and you have a little chat, and it's off the record, and you get more of a sense of what's going on. None of that is happening. And again, that's what's not going to happen on this Lions tour for your touring journalists and fans. There's going to be none of that. So we got no real sense of what's going on other than what comes out officially. Rugby players want to play rugby. The Springboks want to play against the Lions. None of them are doing cartwheels that it's going to be in a cavernous, empty 94,000-seater stadium. But that's, I guess over the last 9 months, all sports people have become quite used to playing in empty stadiums, and it's about the opposition and it's about the game, and they've become quite good at focusing on those things. It's far from ideal. So the reality is, I think rugby players want to play rugby, and if given the choice, they would. But someone like Kolisi, I think if there was a lot of anger and it turned against the Springboks and the Lions, if the country really is, and it looks like it's heading into it is in a crisis, and it looks like the crisis is growing because the rates are picking up around the country as well. You might see people questioning whether it's worth it.
Just one other question I have, Craig, on that. It's like, so you said that they're still trying to establish the scale of this spike in cases, that it seems extraordinary. Like, from what you've heard or from what you've consumed, even media-wise, over the last little while, is there any early idea as to why that is? Is there any, I don't know, situational evidence at play in this region as to why it's badly affected by COVID?
Yeah, I'd be straying too far away from my area of expertise. I've not seen any reasons given. But I think that's a question better asked of virologists and professors of this. But the reality is, it is spiking, and based on the conversation with a highly respected professor, they haven't got to the bottom of why it is.
What about, and I appreciate that this is also a difficult one for you to answer, but in terms of sentiment towards the tour and, once it gets up and running, about levels of engagement from the public, any sense of that at the minute?
Well, based on that piece I wrote, there's been quite a reaction to it, and quite a few people have said to me, one person actually used the phrase, it's starting to feel yuck. It's a small sample. I think there's, even myself as a journalist, I'm really starting to question. I was so excited about the Lions tour. I was so happy it was going to go ahead. And from a purely business point of view, from a South African rugby point of view, it's vital it goes ahead. The income that they're going to earn from television rights is crucial. They lost a lot of money last year, as did everyone. So it's almost critical that rugby survives. The Lions tour is going to give it a cash injection. But I'm also starting to question whether, it's almost, this is probably a poor comparison, but it kind of feels a little bit like playing sport in apartheid. There's far bigger issues at play. And is it really that important when so much else is going on? And from a sporting point of view, you can argue, of course it is, because sport gives a distraction. It's a welcome relief, and it is all those things. But at what point does it become completely nonsensical in a situation where there's such pain and suffering? And I don't know where that line is, but we might find out.
Yeah, it is. It is kind of. It is just a grim picture, and like even thinking about previewing matches or even talking about nostalgia or anything like that, it is all tinted with this idea that there is a very grim picture in the country where this is going to happen. It's hard to see a world where this tour goes off and there isn't some sort of negative reaction in some way to it, Craig.
Yeah, you're quite right. I don't think there will be. It will go without a hitch, that's for sure. But writing a match preview, and your story is going to appear on the same publication that's reporting about 700 deaths in a day. It does feel kind of inconsequential, doesn't it?
Yeah.
But the world, take coronavirus out of it. Any given day, anywhere in the world, there's some sort of massive pain and suffering somewhere, and sport goes on, and so maybe we've got to view it through that prism. Yeah. Maybe it's it is the distraction we need.
Yeah, well, that's the case for it, isn't it? Like, and I mean that nobody would argue that the distraction is worth a single death, or somebody who would have been more vulnerable, obviously being entitled to one of those vaccines. But that's the argument for it, is the great distraction. We've all seen the benefit of that over the last 18 months, how we, it made life more bearable, the fact that sport came back on some level across the last 18 months and distracted us from the craziness. But look, we'll watch and we'll see what happens on the pitch if we park that for the moment. And again, a conversation I've no doubt we'll be coming back to over the next few weeks. On the pitch, what's your expectation of how all this plays out? Obviously, Craig, the Lions have selected a squad that are big and beefy and ready to go at it. Are we expecting? Is that what the expectation is on your side?
Yeah, I think the Lions understand that to beat the Springboks, especially in South Africa, they're going to have to match them physically at least. You can't beat the Springboks if you're getting knocked backwards in contact. It's maybe the All Blacks could do it on occasion, but even the All Blacks, the few games they have lost to the Springboks have always been when they've lost the physical battle. And I think Gatlin knows that better than anyone. His Welsh teams have stood up to the Springboks pretty well over the last 10 years or so, and won more games than they've lost because they've dominated the Springboks physically. And then, of course, you add all the layers on top of that, the skill, the tactics, and the individual brilliance of certain players. So I know some media colleagues in South Africa have been writing the Lions off. I don't know on what we're basing that, because for a start, the Springboks haven't played together for 20 months. and that's immediately, you can spin it and twist it and do it any way you like. That's not an advantage. So they are on the back foot. Now, the Lions, of course, they haven't played together ever, this particular group of players. We'll see them for the first time on Saturday, and I am looking forward to that, by the way. But they are players who've been playing rugby, and a lot of them play for the same country, so there's a fair thread of understanding running through the lines. So I think it's going to be a massive challenge on the field for the Springboks. That said, I think the upside of it for the Springboks is that only 3 of the World Cup players have retired, and there's only one injury, Warwick Gallant. So 28 of the 32 players they used, or 29 of the 33 players they used in Rugby World Cup 2019 are available for this tour. Snyman with a question mark next to him. So there's a lot of continuity from that. They know what to do. They'll click back into their systems pretty easily, and everyone will slot back in. It will be like riding a bicycle. And they've got 2 warm-up games against Georgia, and they're going to use the South African A game against the Lions as almost a 4th test, because I think you'll see a lot of the Springboks that will feature in the tests playing in that game as well. So there's a bit of time to prepare for the Springboks. They've got home ground advantage, they've got altitude advantage, although that will be nullified by the time the tests come around, because the Lions will have acclimatized as well. So, the home ground advantage isn't going to be the same as it normally was, because there's going to be no one in the stands. It's going to be, I think that's going to neutralize the home ground advantage slightly, which is in the Lions' favor. And then, it comes down to, it really does come down to who clicks quickest as a team. So I think the first test, I know it sounds stupidly obvious, but the first test is crucial, because I think it's the Lions' best chance to knock the Springboks over. It will be in Cape Town. It could be wet and slippery. It's middle of winter. And, the Springboks aren't great in those conditions. So it's a really good chance for the Lions to get the tour off on a good start. And then, of course, the pressure will transfer to the Springboks, because you're at match point immediately. So it's intriguing from a rugby point of view. It really is intriguing.
As a rugby journalist, Craig, does winning in 2009, winning that series, does that rank right up there in terms of South African sporting occasions, right up there with 2019, 2007?
Yeah, I mean, I think the second test in 2009 was certainly in the top 3 tests I've ever attended. I mean, it was brutal, and it had everything. It had drama, it had, brilliant rugby, some great tries. So, the physicality was off the charts. I mean, Brian O'Driscoll clashing with Darnie Rousseau is one of the iconic sort of images of Springbok Lions rugby. That test was brilliant. The first test was strangely meek in a way, all the build-up, and then the Springboks ran into that sort of 20-odd point lead in no time, and the Lions fought back. But the second and then the third test, the Lions were just brilliant. And actually, over the course of the series, the Springboks won at 2-1, and they probably only outplayed the Lions for 40 minutes out of the entire series. It was the first 20 minutes in Durban in the first test, and the last 20 minutes in Pretoria in the second test. And I guess that shows, if you can hang in either side, if they can just hang in for those periods when you're suffering, there's opportunity to win it. It's going to be, classic test match rugby. Who wins the last 20 minutes is really where it all comes down to. You could be out of the game, but you got to play till the 85th minute in these tests. So the Lions in 2009 was one of the great. I mean, the '97 series was, of course, fantastic as well, for different reasons. And on that occasion, the Springboks outscored the Lions, I think, by 9 tries to 3 over the series, and lost it because they didn't have a goal kicker, and they had pretty poor tactics, and the Lions were resilient and beat them up front. So the history's great, and that's what saddens me about this whole thing, guys. Is we should have 90,000 people in the stands enjoying this. It really feels like, I don't know. I would have preferred it to be in Britain with 50% crowds, Britain and Ireland. I don't know about Ireland. I don't know what your lockdown situation is at the moment, but it looks, watching the Euros, that it would have been great to have it there. I know the call had to be made several months ago, and with South Africa's beta variant and being on the red zone, the UK government wasn't happy about hosting it there. So there's been so many challenges, and I also just feel desperately sorry for people who have worked so hard on this. There's so many good people, in the South African rugby environment who've worked, and I mean this, they've had to put hundreds of pages of documents together and action plans and operational plans, only to have them torn up by the latest surge and change in government policy and start all over again. It's been a nightmare. So, spare a thought for those people if the tour does somehow all fall apart. I think there's going to be some pretty distraught people for differing reasons, and it really is. It's a tough one. Maybe we should try to focus on the rugby, but I must say I just feel a little depressed about it at the moment.
Yeah, no, I think we were right to spend the vast majority of that conversation, Craig, talking about the main issue at hand. It is difficult to have the rugby conversation in that context, but I've no doubt if it does continue to go ahead, and as you say, it's all indications at the minute that is going to be the case, that we'll be back to you to talk a bit more about events on and off the pitch again over the next few weeks. But well summed up this morning. Thanks a million.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.